Hello to those who've just joined us. Welcome to our AI session today. Alexandra is joining me to have, really, this clinic is more about a discussion than a kind of what our usual setting of kind of a Q&A. And the reason that we're going to do that, we wanted to do that really, is to sort of just say that, you know, this is an evolving marketplace. You're all aware of it. I'm sure you all use it. I'm sure you all have kind of your own views on it. And we wanted to just kind of draw into that, but also give you some insights into what we're seeing from an HR perspective and some of those common themes, and also some of the legalities that we are aware of, just to give you some sort of straight directive about that, because, you know, that's what we're about. So in today's session, we're going to ask you to join in a lot more than we usually do. So you are welcome to use emojis. So give us a show of emojis, please, people. Excellent. Thank you very much. You are welcome to ask questions. Paul is going to be managing the questions, so and feeding them into us. So feel free to ask away, and please do, or chat. Just, you know, generally. So now I've got the housekeeping out of the way, I'm just going to sort of get on with what our kind of premise of it all is. So as you know, it's fast moving, and in games and creative sectors, it's already changing how we ideate, create, produce and work. But while the tools are evolving rapidly, many businesses are still figuring out the human and organizational side of using them responsibly, and that's where policy comes in. In this clinic, we're going to get to practical about what AI policy actually looks like. Over to you, Alexandra, for that little bit. Thank you. And we'll explore where AI is already being used across teams, the ethical considerations organizations might be thinking about, and how to put clear, thoughtful guardrails in place that support the creativity and accountability. We'll also sort of be diving into a little bit more around kind of what we are hearing across industry around the use of it. So we'll talk about something that's coming up in a lot of conversations with studios and creative teams, the impact on people, particularly junior talent. There's understandable anxiety about whether AI replaces early career roles, but the bigger opportunity is teaching people how to use these tools well. If organisations remove junior roles entirely, we risk creating a leadership gap in the future. Today's juniors are tomorrow's leads and directors and studio heads, and succession planning still matters in an AI-enabled world. At the same time, sector leaders need to remember something important. AI may generate answers quickly, but it doesn't bring human context, emotional intelligence, or lived experience. In people management, that human layer matters enormously, and we see that regularly, always, actually, don't we, Alexandra? That's something we see throughout our kind of daily working lives. We'll talk about why emotional intelligence is becoming more and more valuable, not less, and as AI becomes more embedded into how we work, why we need to build those skills. And then we'll explore how businesses can encourage critical thinking when using AI tools. If you were there last week at the UK Conversations, we were talking about the use of critical thinking, and this is definitely something that we're seeing in the AI world. It's almost sort of running as parallel and as fast as the AI is coming in, making sure teams simply don't just accept the first output they're given, but question and refine and apply their own judgment. We'll also touch on how this conversation connects to wider industry discussions around better working standards across the creative sectors, including the Good Work Review being done by the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, and the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Centre, and the British Film Institute. Many of these bodies are looking at how emerging technologies intersect with workforce development for fair work and the long-term sustainability of creative careers. That's a lot, isn't it? So we're going to dive in and start by talking about policy. We might come back to policy, as the discussion evolves. But I wanted to just start with policy, because policy intersects some of the legalities that we're seeing. And definitely we're seeing in our advice and the back office advice that we get. So Alexandra, I'm going to pass this one over to you, because you're the kind of policies expert with us. But tell us a little bit more about what your views and thoughts are about policy, and what you know from a kind of best practice point of view.
So I think the policy one's an interesting one, because it's something that obviously, as time goes on, more and more companies are starting to put into place, but it is certainly something that is still a gap for a lot of places. So I'd say a lot of organisations don't necessarily have a specific AI policy in place currently, or they don't see it as an essential. It's more they think they know how stuff's working, they think they know what they need to have covered, they're speaking to employees about it as needed, but there's nothing actually written down. I think it's going to become increasingly important to have something very specific that's written down, because the key areas that organisations need to focus on are looking at things like what AI tools are permitted for use by employees, and in what context as well. So, for example, if you're saying specific AI tools can be used for drafting and editing documents, for producing some more attractive like presentations, slides, they could be used for like brainstorming ideas, research, analysing data, automating some of those like administration, repetitive types of tasks, then that's all great, but people need to be clear that that's what they can use it for, and then together with that, what they can't use it for. And obviously, depending on the type of company that you're operating, the can'ts are going to be very specific and very particular. Obviously, like a main one for everybody will be they can't be used for like non-work purposes when using company-based equipment and IT and comms systems. Things like writing code, obviously, it's going to be like explicit in there. Writing responses to emails or communications and stuff like that, I think we're seeing more and more that people are being quite open about the fact that they use, whether it's ChatGPT, Claude, other AI systems to help with drafting communications. And I think the key there is help, and not asking AI to write every email that you're sending to somebody and just send it without any like review. You're completely losing, I mean, there's so much to that, but you're also losing your own voice in things, as well as all of the underlying bits and pieces that come with it as well. So quite often it's in policy that you wouldn't be able to write full-on like responses through AI to either internally or externally. Other things like reports, like internal reporting and stuff. There's what comes with that is the sensitivity of the data as well, and making it clear, what you can use it for and what you can't. Policy should also outline risks that are associated with the use of AI. That's really important to cover in it as well. Also things like where you are internally as a company using AI for monitoring purposes. This is one that's quite often missed. So if you're not clear with your employees of how you as a company might be using AI to monitor things, so whether it's monitoring communications, whether it's monitoring any kind of like metrics internally that's going to impact on the employee, then that then breaches on the ethics side, because you're not being open and transparent, and there's a breakdown of trust and everything there that comes with it. I think tying in with that as well is the transparency around not only the monitoring side, but where you're using AI for things like your hiring processes, for example. So like screening, it could be like for analysing engagement surveys, if you're utilising it in that way, performance insights, monitoring productivity as well. Like it's used in so many different ways by different companies. And that bit needs to be tied in neatly with your privacy policy. So if you have a specific like employee privacy policy in place, which I say if you should have a specific
you're working with us, definitely should.
That's what needs to be updated within that to make sure that how you're utilising AI and how it impacts on employees' privacy is covered there, as well as a separate AI policy for just general internal use. IP as well. I was thinking, is there anything I've missed?
Yeah.
IP, yeah. And accountability, so responsibilities. And I think that making it implicit within policy that however you're approving AI to be used by your employees, that there's always the human review piece after that comes with it, and that employees are always responsible for the human checking part of anything that they're utilising it for.
Yeah, and I think that kind of really demonstrates there is a lot just in that kind of policy making. That's enormous, isn't it? And you touched on IP, and just to sort of say, whenever we talk to IP solicitors, they sort of almost tear their hair out at the AI world. That's because a lot of IP legislation is still catching up. So it's still kind of going, oh right, okay, we're here, built the road. That's not to say it won't happen. It's just to say that's what's going on. That means who owns it. Be really discerning. If you're using AI generally in your production, who owns it? And if that's ever tested through any court mechanism, which, let's face it, we're going to see over the next 10, 20, 30 years that sort of play out. You've got to be very careful about who owns that. And so that means that when you're making agreements with, with any other supplier or purchaser in any form, when you've got to have that conversation up front, like who owns the IP. The other thing is, there's a couple of things I want to pick up on with you. I'll come back to hiring in a minute, because that's a bit of personal bugbear, isn't it? Well, my views on this one, so we won't go deep dark into Sarah Brewster's views on it, but we will just give you some sort of highlights. But the other ones I wanted to just pick up on was the legals around this. So from an HR practice point of view, we wouldn't be able to defend the reasons for using AI in our policy making ourselves, in our contract creation, or anything that was to be tested through the courts. The reason for that is that they always want a human judgment, because humans make better judgments, basically. That's probably the long and short of it. Therefore, chucking into ChatGPT or Claude or whoever it is that you use when you've got an issue with an employee, asking them what you do isn't the solution. The reason for that is that HR can always verify against both our resources, so that's things like barristers' chambers that we work with, but also other policy that we are aware of that might be coming in, and other practices that something like a large language model won't be able to do, is to look at it quite as kind of perhaps more worldly view. They'll look at it far too kind of linear view, and that can be dangerous. So that won't stand up in the courts. The same is true potentially if you're using it to create something like your values, and then you're using your values to test against other policies. So for example, or other practices. So for example, that might be practices around performance management, internal conversations, open door policies. If you're then using it as that sort of thing, it won't necessarily stand up, because again, it's not robust enough to be used. So now I'm going to just touch on hiring. Now, I have a personal bugbear about the hiring processes already. So I think there are amazing recruiters out there, because it's a hard job, recruitment. But I think the process of it can sometimes be really clunky and difficult. Using AI, I personally and professionally think actually adds to the complexity of it, not taking away from the complexity about it. But when you are going through 4,000 CVs, which I am hearing from recruiters is the case sometimes at the moment, what are your thoughts on that, Alexandra?
I think it's a tricky one, because it definitely has its place in helping, but like with anything like this, like things can be like overly automated. And obviously we know of discussions around like the bias element, and there has been case law around that's gone to tribunal around the bias of systems when sifting out CVs to be put through for the next stage in hiring process and so on. So there's a lot to be aware about, and there's a lot of risk. But I can also understand where it's beneficial for recruiters or hiring managers to be able to utilize in a way that could help sift a large volume. But it really does depend on the methods that are being used, and then who's sense checking that, and the motivations for using it in the first place as well.
Yeah, and I heard quite an interesting example last week about this, where actually they were saying they had applied it to help them sift through hundreds of CVs. I can't remember the number exactly, but what they actually realized was it wasn't actually doing the job because of the bias. Really, it was too narrow a field. So they went back through and they spent a lot of time then, because it does take time to go through CVs, but actually were able to pull through some really strong candidates. So I do think if you're going to use AI in hiring, I think you've got to really ask yourself some really heavy questions to start with, and then make sure that those questions are then perhaps put into the AI in the first place, and it's got a really wide view, and keep going back to it if it is too narrow, I think, which in some ways I think probably defeats the objective of using it. But we'll move on. So, and I think we're going to go on to critical thinking, because I think we've kind of touched about critical thinking here. And we've said this, but to anyone who's on the call at the moment, we see that critical thinking is there's almost a rise in the need for critical thinking skill, almost a rise in the need to be, slow it down, don't react, respond, think, take time, and then ask, questions in a meaningful way. I don't want you to go out and criticize people. Critical thinking is not criticizing people. It's asking questions to get to a better answer or a better result. So what are your thoughts about that? What are you seeing, and particularly in relation to AI? Do you think we're right? Do you think that is something that we need to get better at? Or do you think that you have a different view? You can give us, yeah. Yes, Chaba. Can you speak? Paul, can Chaba speak, or does he have to go on to the chat? Aha! There. Try speaking.
Hello.
Well,
I can now turn my microphone on, so you're all doomed.
good.
So,
Good.
yeah, does it work? Yes, it does
Yeah,
work.
right.
Okay, so critical thinking, I think we're all doomed. So an interesting side effect of AI and I can show you examples that there is absolutely no way in how that you can tell it's AI. Nobody, even AI, can't identify it being AI. It's getting really, really good. And the unfortunate side effect is that, yes, many people will start using critical thinking, but then you will overuse it. And then you start questioning reality as AI. And then this whole internet becomes an absolute nightmare, because you will have no reference point as to what's real and what's not. And it is already happening. Because if you look at some content and it looks a bit dodgy, you're like, I'm wondering if it's AI. And then you look at something that someone does something like absolutely bonkers, and you look at it, that must be AI.
Yeah, that's true, isn't it? There's a real blurring. But I also thinking about like the actual, like, before you start to apply it from an actual, so not reading stuff that's already out there, but thinking about how you're going to apply it, perhaps in game development or whatever else it might be. Is the critical thinking there?
Well, you could ask Amazon. And if you guys read it today, they basically fired a ton of senior engineers, and they had a whole day of Amazon shopping outage because AI wrote code that just wasn't up to scratch, and they forced everyone to use AI. There you go, zero critical thinking. Even though people said that we need to establish a process to use it, they didn't, because there's a massive push coming from management that it has to be AI based, because that's where cost saving or whatever it is at the moment. And unfortunately, it didn't work out. And you can hear all these stories from Microsoft, from Oracle, from all the other companies, there is, in the corporate world, there isn't really a lot of critical thinking around AI and using it. It really is a cost-saving driven exercise in most cases.
Yeah.
In a smaller environment, like a certain company I know, it's pretty good. So you can use it in a more meaningful way, but it actually accelerates your workflow. You do use the output, but you don't use the output directly in some cases. In other cases, it's perfectly fine to use the output as well. It going back, it definitely can cause problems with communication as well. So if people are not aware of how you plan to use it, it can cause a lot of distress, especially when people start thinking that it can make a better job of something that I do, and my job is in danger because of it. So it is definitely worth, but even when you explore, is setting some sort of a direction why you're looking into exploring it.
Yes, and I think that's true. So we'll come to that because that's the ethics part of it. We'll come to that in a minute. But yeah, I think that's true. And I think that's common. It's interesting as well what you're saying about Amazon and Microsoft actually versus I went to a talk. If you're in games and you know him, Tommy Thompson, is a kind of quite a sector leader in the AI kind of world. And he was sort of saying about the big 7 in Silicon Valley and how they're applying it, but actually how they're not really making any profit. So I wonder what we'll see in time, how that then translates, and whether it's more kind of an R&D point at the moment, and actually they'll go backwards. Who knows? They probably won't go backwards. That's the scary thing.
It already exists.
Yeah, and well, absolutely, but yeah, maybe it's how we apply it that's the learning, isn't it? Okay, thanks for that, Csaba. Has anyone else got anything that they wanted to say or ask on the critical thinking thing before we move on? No, okay. So junior staff, Csaba sort of picked up on kind of sort of how you're explaining it to sort of staff and the use of it, and that kind of point about those large organizations using it. I think at the moment there is a real push to sort of reassure people, and again, Alexandra and I sort of see this quite regularly. There is anxiety around the use of it. I definitely hear two sides of this story quite ferociously at the moment. Is that the right word? Sorry, brain's probably not fully firing on that. But I definitely find that this is a really interesting debate, and there's definitely some kind of it's a real push and pull, and particularly in relation to what's going on politically. There's quite a lot of people, individuals, even working with big corporates, and the big corporates that are making quite interesting decision making about the use of some of these AI models in direct relation to the state of the world. But where it comes to sort of staffing, the anxiety around younger people and incoming careers people. Alexandra, have you got anything you've got in your views around this?
I think there is definitely the anxiety generation that's come with this on like what's going to happen to us, how are they going to gain the experience that they need to develop a career in whatever field they're looking to develop in. Like, how are they going to grow that knowledge if AI is taking over the foundation level tasks that historically they would have done? Like, where is that going to come from? So I think part of that piece is looking at how companies can still utilize the junior roles as part of growth development. Part of that is obviously like teaching them around the use of AI and how to do that in the best way possible, and how that can then guide them into whatever the next step might be for their career. But it's about looking at a different angle. It's not about replacing those junior roles.
Mm.
We have had conversations with companies that have had this reaction of, well, we're just not going to recruit any junior staff anymore, without thinking of the longer term impact of that and the wider implications. Like you're never going to be able to like grow and develop at all. There's not going to be any succession planning in your business if there's no junior staff there to grow and develop. You're going to have a massive leadership skills gap in about 10 years time, because there's not going to be anybody there to do that job.
Yeah.
So it's looking at the whole, for businesses, looking at the whole model in a completely different way as to what those junior roles look like and how they can still contribute to the needs and the growth of the business, whilst utilizing AI in the right way to be able to do that.
Yeah, and that kind of fits with that exit planning. Like, if you're not a big company, you are a small company, and you're replacing staff with AI, then ultimately that's going to have an impact on your exit. What company have you got left to exit if it's replacing that? And the other thing I was sort of thinking is it's sort of along the same lines as the exit is kind of mergers. Like if you're looking to merge with something, what are you merging? If it's just sort of AI chatbots and so on and so forth.
You want to see like a stable foundation that's there in terms of like the people plan and the people strategy and that development for growth. So if you do not have that layer from the foundation, it's not going to sit very well.
And it's true to say that perhaps in some situations this is streamlining, particularly when it's a massive corporation. It's streamlining to an extent. But what I've heard as well recently is that some of those corporations are actually starting to teach sort of graduate entries and apprenticeship entries how to use AI rather than getting it as a replacement. And I think that, and literally teaching them how the skills of being more discerning. That's not related to the creative industries directly, but this is related to the sort of automotive industry. And I know that we've got a family friend whose son is doing an apprenticeship, and they're literally teaching him how to use AI rather than replacing him. So I think there is some of that going on, and perhaps increasingly that will also become a thing. And then the other thing I think is important to say here is kind of what we're seeing is some patterns around it replacing it, because there's a bias in it. It's almost taking away kind of skills that are not just sort of, it's not about, genders or race or any protected characteristic, but it's actually so biased, it's actually losing some of those skills when it's actually bringing in kind of thinking. And actually what we're seeing is, I'm definitely seeing that there's more and more examples of where that bias is actually becoming a negative, and actually interestingly is making people go back to, well, what would a human do? So I mean, that comes back to the ethics. Chapper, I saw that your hand was up. Did you want to say something? He's coming in.
Hello. Yeah, it's me again. So it's not only juniors.
No.
There's a trend going on as well that generally seniors get cuts as well, and the expectation is that kind of the pattern seems to be that they're asked to document every process, every design decision they ever made in the company, and that's get fed into AI, and then less experienced people would be using AI to kind of work above their normal level. And that is kind of reflected in at least that's my kind of a personal small sample reference of super senior people not being able to find jobs in any shape or form because companies are not hiring above a certain level. So there seems to be kind of, it's narrowing to like mid-level, even though they call them seniors, they're not. Juniors are definitely in trouble, but you can see that it kind of narrows down the layer of experience that companies tend to hire.
Yeah, so that is one of our next kind of areas to discuss. But yeah, you're right. I'm definitely seeing that. But what I'm also seeing against on the balance of that, so the flip side of that, actually is that senior staff are now having to have much more human skills. So they're having to have much more higher EQ or better EQ skills in order to both manage their teams and their conversations with their teams, but also what they're asking of the AI. And it's really interesting that this is across absolutely every conversation I have, whether that's with friends or with work, where I'm really hearing that kind of interpersonal skills, that the need for it, those real needs for empathy, the real needs for kindness and compassion, and an increasing need for that, and that there is a kind of expectation that senior staff will be able to support different, not lower, but different skills within the organization with that, and being much more reassuring. So I find that really interesting. On the ethics piece, then, the ethics piece is huge, right? It's a moral compass, this, isn't it? It's a moral kind of, like I said, we've touched on kind of, there is a geopolitical conversation around this. There is, ChatGPT's founder has recently said something about the use of ChatGPT in military use. There's we've touched on the kind of the bias around it, and the conscious bias. It's not unconscious, it's significantly conscious biases around it. We've touched on the kind of different skill sets. Are there any other ethical issues that you're seeing in your kind of organizations or your world that you think are valid to be discussing and raising in this session? Stick your hand up or put something in the chat if you do. I'm definitely seeing in the last couple of weeks since the ChatGPT founder made the kind of comment about the use of in military, I've literally seen every network I'm in, people just leaving ChatGPT. So I found that's really interesting. But also kind of from an organization point of view, what are you asking of people if it goes against their ethics to use something, if it goes against their morals to get to use something, or their values? Are we saying, well, it's a blanket, yes, you must, or are we saying we respect that you've got a difference about it? And is that even feasible? If we're asking you to be more efficient, is it even feasible to say, well, we also have to allow for difference in values? Chapa. Hello.
I just want to say that the chat is turned off, so there is no way for anyone to add anything to it.
Thank you.
That could probably be useful.
Paul?
But the only thing I would add is, if there's a business need for using AI, there's a business need for using AI. It is the same sort of thing. If you remember, we went through the same problem. Some of you might remember with Photoshop when it was introduced in the gaming industry. It caused absolute mayhem. And then really quickly, people realized that it's a tool that they can use. So again, it depends on how you use it, but it was a business case that you had to use Photoshop, regardless of you wanting it, using it or not. This is where the personal feelings versus business goals can collide quite badly. And then this is where you guys come in and then have some discussions around that.
And so on that, so what's really interesting about that and what we're seeing is, so I'm going to use Tommy Thompson as a example here, but what he said in a recent talk that I saw of his was that more and more that he is seeing that companies are using it to find patterns. So for example, if you're a producer and you've got developing the game, you've got lots going on, actually the ticket raising, so whether it's Jira or whatever it is, they're using it to kind of just quantify which kind of tickets are the same, and so almost like an efficiency model. So that's something that's really interesting. And then that seems to be definitely correlates with what I'm seeing. I think probably you too, Alexandra, is there's sort of a use of it as an efficiency tool. I'm definitely seeing it as an efficiency tool in things like, you know, writing training or writing, you know, whatever it might be within the game development. I'm seeing it more as a kind of an efficiency in the creation rather than replacing as a creation, and that fits with what Tommy Thompson was saying. The other piece, and I think this is really interesting, and that sort of fits with the IP laws that I was mentioning earlier, is in the EU there is legislation about the use of AI. So you have to be able to justify the use of AI in any ideation of any product or service. You then have to be able to Paul, I'm going to bring you in. You then have to be able to train everyone in the why you're using it, number one, and then the use of it generally. And I think we might see that catch up in parts of the world. I can't say which parts of the world, given that the world has gone completely upside down in the last few years. You know, what probably once might have been, you know, America catching up, I'm not sure it will. But I think that's really interesting, because I think we are beginning to see that there is people saying, slow it down. We have, you know, it will impact economy if you use this and take as a replacement for people. This kills jobs, and we're already seeing that, like you said, Jabba, there is an impact on jobs, and that has an impact on economies, right? So ultimately, I think we do have the ethics part of it is quite strong, and that's sort of why we're saying, what's your critical thinking about it? Can you slow it down?
It's also with the ethics side, and touching on the point around whether there could be a mismatch between the business needs of use of AI and somebody's perspective on a specific AI tool, whether it's ChatGPT or others. It's taking it back to the hiring process. And have you thought about what's been covered as part of that hiring process, like how you're speaking to people about their perspectives on the use of AI, and whether that actually marries up with what you need from that role and how you operate as a business? And you're then exploring whether there is a match or a mismatch right from the start, as opposed to identifying it when somebody's embedded in the role already, and then you have issues.
Yeah, I think this is sort of, I'm old enough to remember the start of the internet, sorry to say. I remember everyone sort of panicking then. And what Tommy Thompson related this AI kind of use to now, thank you, Fiona, it's basically we're in the same kind of bubble with AI now as we were with the start of the internet. That kind of AI, that the .com boom, kind of when that imploded, what was left was, certainly in the early days of the internet, was actually really good, and it was a real kind of opportunity for creativity and change that was really actually quite exciting. We could we're not going to waste our energy on where the internet's gone now, because we haven't got time, nor does it matter necessarily. But I do wonder whether in the similar sort of period with AI, and what we're left with overall will be better, because I think you can't run a company, big or small, without recognizing that if you replace people, there is an impact on the economy. So that ultimately impacts your job. No matter how you say it, ultimately, you know, if people haven't got the money to buy the product or service, no matter how big or small you are, that has a direct impact on you. So I'll be really interested to see where this goes. And the trends with that. So let's just bring this sort of to EQ and back to that kind of critical thinking. Hopefully the chat is working, but if not, I'm going to get you to use emojis. If the chat's working, can you just sort of test it and put a message in the chat for us, and Paul can let us know it's working? It works. Brilliant. Thank you. Excellent. So EQ, I know generally we could all argue that everyone could be a bit better with the EQ thing, but let's relate it directly to AI. Other than critical thinking, are there other areas of kind of the EQ language, so to speak, that you think could be part of how we use AI? Pop something in the chat if you do, if you can think. I think empathy. What does anyone else think? Thumbs up, thumbs down, hearts, whatever, emojis, something in the chat. What do you think about empathy? Yeah. What do you think about understanding, so not just empathy, but also a bit of compassion? I can see two of you want to speak. Did some, oh, you've all come back on. Is that because you gave us a thumbs up, maybe? What about compassion? What about listening? Active listening, listening without solutionizing it. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I think the listening thing is something, again, critical thinking and listening is something we're seeing a lot, isn't it, Alexandra? There's a really big growing trends, I think, for us.
Yeah, definitely. And it all fits into what we always say about the psychological safety element.
Exactly.
But it's human. Like AI can't replace that.
It 100% can't replace that. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? I think it's that being really mindful of how you communicate, but also how you listen to fears, right? If people are worried, don't dismiss it. Don't be like, oh, come on, we need this to just, it's not, I don't think that's right. I think it's, listen. And actually, sometimes people have got a viewpoint you're not actually aware of. So you might have just applied AI because it's an efficiency thing. If somebody's got a viewpoint that actually is like, well, it's killing the planet, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Are you listening? Are you doing something about the planet, your responsibility to the planet? So yeah, I think that's really important. Alexandra seems to have disappeared. Have you gone? So I think that's really important. In terms of EQ, kind of and the listening skills, do you think it is just simply being good at listening, or do you think it's being good at how you hear those in that thinking message and then applying it across the organization? It's one thing to just hear something, it's another thing to sort of go, actually, this has an impact on the business, so what am I going to do with it? In my head, actually, I couldn't quite articulate it, but I think that's a really good point. If AI does it all for you, AI, you're not thinking, you're not even processing yourself. So I think that's a really good point. Sylv, your hands up. Did you want to take yourself off mute, lovely?
Hello. Yes, I wanted to kind of expand on Lindy's kind of point, whereby, when you're reading something that could be quite serious, it may actually also provoke a reaction in you. So I think having that understanding of, is this actually something that I should be reacting to because there's resonance there? Or is this something that, that particular person is, kind of going through, and I need to deal with this in a particular way? So I think we also, that self-awareness and that EQ piece, I think there has to be great self-awareness of, why am I reacting this way? What's sparking that reaction? And that obviously something that, AI removes any kind of emotional or human element, which you guys have already covered. But I just wanted to say that, so thank you.
No, I think that's a really important point. I think on the contrast to that as well, is that when you sort of think about in our industry on a human level, there are people with mental health conditions, neurodivergent conditions, where rejection and information can feel very brutal, even if it's not intended that way. So actually, using sometimes AI can take the emotion out of something, can make it sound perhaps less emotional, So it can sometimes be used for good as well in those settings. So for example, if you have got information that's you found quite hurtful, putting it into one of those language models to help you kind of disseminate, was it intended to be hurtful, can actually be perhaps help you start to build on, oh, actually maybe that's more of my anxiety or my concerns, and perhaps could be a way of using it more positively. That's not to say it replaces the human. It's just that I've definitely found sometimes when I'm feeling quite emotional about something, I might be feeling a bit heated, or I might be feeling a bit sad about something, asking, you know, AI to sort of take that emotion out can be really useful, because it can just make me sort of go, yeah, I'm relaxed. That's not to say that it takes away my feelings or emotions about it. It just helps me sort of think a bit more slowly, perhaps, is the thing. But yeah, I think it's really important to know processing is really important. And I think processing is the human, perhaps, because it, you know, AI processes, but it doesn't process with emotion. We process with emotion. So, where it's being used for good, I know it's being used in fraud detection. I know it's being used in health care. It's making some rapid advances in health. Yes, that's a great way of putting it, Silver. It should be the muscle, not the brain. Yeah, that's brilliant. Can we quote you on that? That is genius. But yeah, so I think it's being used for good in some places, and I think whilst it's definitely clear, and it's clear across industry, no matter what industry you're in, we need to be careful with its application. I definitely think it is doing good, and there are places where, like I said, things like healthcare, where it has making huge advancements. The same is true as sustainability, ironically, that it uses so much of the energy to exist, yet actually it's making some great advances in sort of the science of sustainability. So I think we are going to see it used in good. I think it's just perhaps about erring on the side of caution when we use it. And maybe, Sylv, it's the muscle, not the brain, is what we should all remember. So before we finish, is there anything that anyone wanted to add? Anything that anyone wanted to ask us about? Whilst you've got Alexandra, if you wanted to ask about policy or anything in kind of the legal perspective, I'm sure she won't mind being tested too much. She might cry, but she won't. I'm sure she won't mind. And if not, you've got 9 minutes of your afternoon back. Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us. If you've got anything that you wanted to add or say or ask us afterwards, or any of those, you know where we are. You can always come to us and find us afterwards. And take care, everyone. Have a lovely Wednesday afternoon, and we will speak to you really soon.
Thank you.
Take care.